Chapter 19 of Aaron's Rod by D.H. Lawrence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. Cleopatra, but not Anthony. Aaron awoke in the morning feeling better, but still only a part of himself. The night alone had restored him, and the need to be alone was still his greatest need. He felt an intense resentment against the Marchesa. He felt that somehow she had given him a scorpion, and his instinct was to hate her. And yet he avoided hating her. He remembered Lily, and the saying that one must possess oneself, and be alone in possession of oneself, and somehow under the influence of Lily he refused to allow the reflex of his own passion. He refused to hate the Marchesa. He did like her. He did esteem her. And after all, she too was struggling with her fate. He had a genuine sympathy with her. Nay, he was not going to hate her. But he could not see her. He could not bear the thought that she might call and see him. So he took the tram to Settignano, and walked away all day into the country, having bread and sausage in his pocket. He sat for long hours among the cypress trees of Tuscany, and never had any trees seemed so like ghosts, like soft, strange, pregnant presences. He lay and watched tall cypresses breathing and communicating, faintly moving and as it were walking in the small wind. And his soul seemed to leave him and to go far away, far back, perhaps, to where life was all different and time passed otherwise than time passes now. As in clairvoyance he perceived it, that our life is only a fragment of the shell of life. That there has been and will be life, human life as such we do not begin to conceive. Much that is life has passed away from men, leaving us all mere bits. In the dark, mindful silence and inflection of the cypress trees, lost races, lost language, lost human ways of feeling and of knowing. Men have known as we can no more know, have felt as we can no more feel. Great life realities gone into the darkness. But the cypresses commemorate. In the afternoon Aaron felt the cypresses rising dark about him, like so many high visitants from an old, lost, subtle world, where men had the wonder of demons about them, the aura of demons, such as still clings to the cypresses in Tuscany. All day he did not make up his mind what he was going to do. His first impulse was never to see her again, and this was his intention all day. But as he went home in the tram, he softened, and thought. Nay, that would not be fair, for how had she treated him otherwise than generously? She had been generous, and the other thing that he felt blasted afterwards, which was his experience, that was fate, and not her fault. So he must see her again. He must not act like a churl, but he would tell her that he was a married man, and that though he had left his wife, and though he had no dogma of fidelity, still the years of marriage had made a married man of him. And any other woman than his wife was a strange woman to him, a violation. I will tell her, he said to himself, that at the bottom of my heart I love Lottie still, and that I can't help it. I believe that is true. It isn't love, perhaps, but it is marriage. I am married to Lottie, and that means I can't be married to another woman. It isn't my nature. And perhaps I can't bear to live with Lottie now, because I am married and not in love. When a man is married, he is not in love. A husband is not a lover. Lily told me that. And I know it's true now. Lily told me that a husband cannot be a lover, and a lover cannot be a husband, and that women will only have lovers now, and never a husband. Well, I am a husband, if I am anything, and I shall never be a lover again, not while I live. No, not to anybody. I haven't it in me. I'm a husband, and so it is finished with me as a lover. I can't be a lover any more, just as I can't be aged 20 any more. I'm a man now, not an adolescent. And to my sorrow, I'm a husband to a woman who wants a lover, always a lover. But all women want lovers, and I can't be it any more. I don't want to. I have finished that. Finished forever. Unless I become senile. Therefore, next day he gathered up his courage. He would not have had courage unless he had known that he was not alone. The other man was in the town, and from this fact he derived his strength, the fact that Lily was there. So at tea-time he went over the river and rang at her door. Yes, she was at home, and she had other visitors. She was wearing a beautiful soft afternoon dress, again of a blue like chicory flowers, a pale warm blue, and she had cornflowers in her belt. Heaven knows where she had got them. She greeted Aaron with some of the childish shyness. He could tell that she was glad he had come, and that she had wondered at his not coming sooner. She introduced him to her visitors, 2 young ladies and 1 old lady and 1 elderly Italian count. The conversation was mostly in French or Italian, so Aaron was rather out of it. However, the visitors left fairly early, so Aaron stayed them out. When they had gone, he asked, "Where is Manfredi?" "He will come in soon, at about 7 o'clock. Then there was silence again. "You are dressed fine today," he said to her. "Am I?" She smiled. He was never able to make out quite what she felt, what she was feeling, but she had a quiet little air of proprietorship in him which he did not like. "You will stay to dinner tonight, won't you?" she said. "No, not tonight," he said, and then awkwardly he added, "You know, I think it is better if we are friends, not lovers. You know, I don't feel free. I feel my wife, I suppose, somewhere inside me, and I can't help it." She bent her head and was silent for some moments. Then she lifted her face and looked at him oddly. "Yes," she said, "I am sure you love your wife." The reply rather staggered him, and to tell the truth, annoyed him. "Well," he said, "I don't know about love, but when one has been married for 10 years, and I did love her, then some sort of bond or something grows. I think some sort of connection grows between us, you know, and it isn't natural quite to break it. Do you know what I mean?" She paused a moment, then very softly, almost gently, she said, "Yes, I do. I know so well what you mean." He was really surprised at her soft acquiescence. What did she mean? "But we can be friends, can't we?" he said. "Yes, I hope so." "Why, yes, goodness, yes, I should be sorry if we couldn't be friends." After which speech he felt that everything was all right. Everything was A1. And when Manfredi came home, the first sound he heard was the flute and his wife's singing. "I'm so glad you've come," his wife said to him. "Shall we go into the sala and have real music? Will you play?" "I should love to," replied the husband. Behold them, then, in the big drawing-room, and Aaron and the Marchese practicing together, and the Marchesa singing an Italian folk-song, while her husband accompanied her on the pianoforte. But her singing was rather strained and forced. Still, they were quite a little family, and it seemed quite nice. As soon as she could, the Marchesa left the 2 men together whilst she sat apart. Aaron and Manfredi went through the old Italian and old German music, tried one thing and then another, and seemed quite like brothers. They arranged a piece which they should play together on a Saturday morning, 8 days hence. The next day, Saturday, Aaron went to one of the Del Torre music mornings. There was a string quartet, and a violin soloist, and the Marchese at the piano. The audience, some 12 or 14 friends, sat at the near end of the room, or in the smaller salata, whilst the musicians performed at the further end of the room. The Lillys were there, both Tanny and her husband. But apart from these, Aaron knew nobody, and felt uncomfortable. The Marchesa gave her guests little sandwiches and glasses of wine, or marsala, or vermouth, as they chose. And she was quite the hostess, the well-bred and very simple, but still the conventional hostess. Aaron did not like it, and he could see that Lily too was unhappy. In fact, the little man bolted the moment he could, dragging after him the indignant Tanny, who was so looking forward to the excellent little sandwiches. But no, Lily just rudely bolted. Aaron followed as soon as he could. "Will you come to dinner tomorrow evening?" said his hostess to him as he was leaving, and he agreed. He had really resented seeing her as a conventional hostess, attending so charmingly to all the other people, and treating him so merely as one of the guests, among many others, so that when at the last moment she quietly invited him to dinner next day, he was flattered and accepted at once. The next day was Sunday, the 7th day after his coming together with the Marchesa, which had taken place on the Monday. And already he was feeling much less dramatic in his decision to keep himself apart from her, to be merely friends. Already the memory of the last time was fanning up in him, not as a warning, but as a terrible incitement. Again the naked desire was getting hold of him, with that peculiar, brutal powerfulness which startled him and also pleased him, so that by the time Sunday morning came, his recoil had exhausted itself, and he was ready again, eager again, but more wary this time. He sat in his room alone in the morning, playing his flute, playing over from memory the tunes she loved, and imagining how he and she would get into unison in the evening. His flute, his Aaron's rod, would blossom once again with splendid scarlet flowers, the red Florentine lilies. It was curious, the passion he had for her. Just unalloyed desire, and nothing else. Something he had not known in his life before. Previously there had been always some personal quality, some sort of personal tenderness, but here, none. She did not seem to want it. She seemed to hate it, indeed. No, all he felt was stark, naked desire, without a single pretension. True enough, his last experience had been a warning to him. His desire and himself likewise had broken rather disastrously under the proving, but not finally broken. He was ready again, and with all the sheer powerful insolence of desire he looked forward to the evening, for he almost expected Manfredi would not be there. The officer had said something about having to go to Padua on the Saturday afternoon. So Aaron went skipping off to his appointment at 7 o'clock. Judge of his chagrin, then, when he found already seated in the salata an elderly, quite well-known, very cultured, and very well-connected English authoress. She was charming, in her white hair and dress of soft white wool and white lace, with a long chain of filigree gold beads like bubbles. She was charming in her old-fashioned manner, too, as if the world were still safe and stable, like a garden in which delightful culture and choice ideas bloomed safe from wind and weather. Alas, never was Aaron more conscious of the crude collapse in the world than when he listened to this animated young-seeming lady from the safe days of the 70s. All the old culture and choice ideas seemed like blowing bubbles. And dear old Corinna Wade, she seemed to be blowing bubbles still, as she sat there so charming in her soft white dress, and talked with her bright animation about the influence of woman in Parliament, and the influence of woman in the Periclean day. Aaron listened spellbound, watching the bubbles float round his head, and almost hearing them go pop. To complete the party arrived an elderly litterateur who was more proud of his not very important social standing than of his literature. In fact, he was one of those English snobs of the old order living abroad, perfectly well dressed for the evening. His grey hair and his prim face was the most well-dressed thing to be met in North Italy. "Oh, so glad to see you, Mr. French. I didn't know you were in Florence again. You make that journey from Venice so often, I wonder you don't get tired of it," cried Corinna Wade. "No," he said, "so long as duty to England calls me to Florence, I shall come to Florence. But I can live in no town but Venice." "No, I suppose you can't. Well, there is something special about Venice. Having no streets and no carriages, and moving about in a gondola, I suppose it is all much more soothing. Much less nerve-racking, yes. And then there is a quality in the whole life. Of course I see few English people in Venice, only the old Venetian families as a rule." "Ah, yes. That must be very interesting. They are very exclusive still, the Venetian noblesse?" said Miss Wade. "Oh, very exclusive," said Mr. French. "That is one of the charms. Venice is really altogether exclusive. It excludes the world, really, and defies time and modern movement. Yes, in spite of the steamers on the canal and the tourists." "That is so, that is so. Venice is a strange backwater. And the old families are very proud still in these democratic days. They have a great opinion of themselves, I am told." "Well," said Mr. French, "perhaps you know the rhyme. Veneziano gran signore, Padovano buon dottore, Vicenese mangia il gatto, Veronese tutto matto." "How very amusing," said Miss Wade. "Veneziano gran signore. The Venetian is a great gentleman. Yes, I know they are all convinced of it. Really, how very amusing in these advanced days. To be born a Venetian is to be born a great gentleman. But this outdoes divine right of king." "To be born a Venetian gentleman is to be born a great gentleman," said Mr. French rather fussily. "You seriously think so?" said Miss Wade. "Well now, what do you base your opinion on?" Mr. French gave various bases for his opinion. "Yes, very interesting, very interesting. Rather like the Byzantines, lingering on into far other ages. Anna Komnena always charmed me very much. How she despised the flower of the north, even Tancred. And so the lingering Venetian families. And you, in your palazzo on the Grand Canal, you are a northern barbarian civilized into the old Venetian signoria. But how very romantic a situation." It was really amusing to see the old maid, how she skirmished and hit out gaily, like an old jaunty free-lance, and to see the old bachelor, how prim he was, and nervy and fussy and precious, like an old maid. But need we say that Mr. Aaron felt very much out of it? He sat and listened, with a sardonic small smile on his face, and a sardonic gleam in his blue eyes that looked so very blue on such an occasion. He made the two elderly people uncomfortable with his silence, his democratic silence, Miss Wade might have said. However, Miss Wade lived out towards Galuzzo, so she rose early to catch her tram, and Mr. French gallantly and properly rose to accompany her to see her safe on board, which left Aaron and the Marchesa alone. "What time is Manfredi coming back?" said he. "Tomorrow," replied she. There was a pause. "Why do you have those people?" he asked. "Who?" "Those two who were here this evening." "Miss Wade and Mr. French? Oh, I like Miss Wade so very much. She is so refreshing." "Those old people," said Aaron. "They licked the sugar off the pill, and go on as if everything was toffee, and we've got to swallow the pill. It's easy to be refreshing. No, don't say anything against her. I like her so much." "And him?" "Mr. French. Well, he's perhaps a little like the princess who felt the pea through 3 feather-beds. But he can be quite witty, and an excellent conversationalist, too. Oh, yes, I like him quite well." "Matter of taste," said Aaron. They had not much to say to one another. The time passed in the pauses. He looked at his watch. "I shall have to go," he said. "Won't you stay?" she said, in a small, muted voice. "Stay all night?" he said. "Won't you?" "Yes," he said quietly. Did he not feel the strength of his desire on him? After which she said no more. Only she offered him whiskey and soda, which he accepted. "Go, then," he said to her, "and I'll come to you. Shall I come in 15 minutes? She looked at him with strange, slow, dark eyes, and he could not understand. "Yes," she said, and she went. And again, this night as before, she seemed strangely small and clinging in his arms. And this night he felt his passion drawn from him as if a long, live nerve were drawn out from his body, a long live thread of electric fire, a long living nerve finally extracted from him, from the very roots of his soul, a long fine discharge of pure bluish fire from the core of his soul. It was an excruciating, but also an intensely gratifying sensation. This night he slept with a deeper obliviousness than before, but as it grew towards morning, how he wished he could be alone. They must stay together till the day was light, and she seemed to love clinging to him and curling strangely on his breast. He could never reconcile it with her who was a hostess entertaining her guests. How could she now in a sort of little ecstasy curl herself and nestle herself on his, Aaron's, breast, tangling his face all over with her hair? He verily believed that this was what she really wanted of him, to curl herself on his naked breast, to make herself small, small, to feel his arms around her, while he himself was remote, silent, in some way inaccessible. This seemed almost to make her beside herself with gratification. But why? Why? Was it because he was one of her own race, and she, as it were, crept right home to him? He did not know. He only knew it had nothing to do with him, and that save out of complacence he did not want it. It simply blasted his own central life. It simply blighted him. And she clung to him closer. Strange, she was afraid of him as of a fetish afraid, and fetish fascinated. Or was her fear only a delightful game of cat and mouse? Or was the fear genuine, and the delight the greater, a sort of sacrilege? The fear, and the dangerous sacrilegious power over that which she feared. In some way, she was not afraid of him at all. In some other way, she used him as a mere magic implement, used him with the most amazing priestess craft. Himself, the individual man which he was, this she treated with an indifference that was startling to him. He forgot, perhaps, that this was how he had treated her. His famous desire for her, what had it been but this same attempt to strike a magic fire out of her, for his own ecstasy? They were playing the same game of fire. In him, however, there was all the time something hard and reckless and defiant, which stood apart. She was absolutely gone in her own incantations. She was absolutely gone, like a priestess utterly involved in her terrible rites. And he was part of the ritual only. God and victim in one. God and victim. All the time, God and victim. When his aloof soul realized, amid the welter of incantation, how he was being used, not as himself, but as something quite different, God and victim, then he dilated with intense surprise, and his remote soul stood up tall and knew itself alone. He didn't want it, not at all. He knew he was apart, and he looked back over the whole mystery of their love contact. Only his soul was apart. He was aware of the strength and beauty and godlikeness that his breast was then to her, the magic. But himself, he stood far off, like Moses' sister Miriam. She would drink the one drop of his innermost heart's blood, and he would be carrion, as Cleopatra killed her lovers in the morning. Surely they knew that death was their just climax. They had approached the climax. Except then. But his soul stood apart, and could have nothing to do with it. If he had really been tempted, he would have gone on, and she might have had his central heart's blood. Yes, and thrown away the carrion. He would have been willing. But fatally he was not tempted. His soul stood apart and decided. At the bottom of his soul he disliked her. Or if not her, then her whole motive, her whole life mode. He was neither God nor victim, neither greater nor less than himself. His soul, in its isolation as she lay on his breast, chose it so, with the soul's inevitability. So there was no temptation. When it was sufficiently light, he kissed her and left her. Quietly he left the silent flat. He had some difficulty in unfastening the various locks and bars and catches of the massive door downstairs, and began in irritation and anger to feel he was a prisoner, that he was locked in. But suddenly the ponderous door came loose, and he was out in the street. The door shut heavily behind him with a shudder. He was out in the morning streets of Florence. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20, Part A, of Aaron's Rod by D.H. Lawrence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20, The Broken Rod, Part A. The day was rainy. Aaron stayed indoors alone and copied music and slept. He felt the same stunned, withered feeling as before, but less intensely, less disastrously this time. He knew now, without argument or thought, that he would never go again to the Marchesa, not as a lover. He would go away from it all. He did not dislike her, but he would never see her again. A great gulf had opened, leaving him alone on the far side. He did not go out till after dinner. When he got downstairs, he found the heavy night door closed. He wondered, then remembered the Signorina's fear of riots and disturbances, as again he fumbled with the catches. He felt that the doors of Florence were trying to prevent his egress. However, he got out. It was a very dark night, about 9 o'clock, and deserted seeming. He was struck by the strange, deserted feeling of the city's atmosphere, yet he noticed before him at the foot of the statue 3 men, one with a torch, a long torch with naked flames. The men were stooping over something dark, the man with the torch bending forward too. It was a dark, weird little group, like medieval Florence. Aaron lingered on his doorstep, watching. He could not see what they were doing, but now the 2 were crouching down over a long, dark object on the ground, and the one with the torch bending also to look. What was it? They were just at the foot of the statue, a dark little group under the big pediment, the torch flames weirdly flickering as the torch-bearer moved and stooped lower to the 2 crouching men, who seemed to be kneeling. Aaron felt his blood stir. There was something dark and mysterious, stealthy, in the little scene. It was obvious the men did not want to draw attention. They were so quiet and furtive-seeming, and an eerie instinct prevented Aaron's going nearer to look. Instead, he swerved onto the Lungarno and went along the top of the square, avoiding the little group at the center. He walked the deserted, dark-seeming street by the river, then turned inwards into the city. He was going to the Piazza Vittoria Emanuele, to sit in the café, which is the center of Florence at night. There he could sit for an hour, and drink his vermouth, and watch the Florentines. As he went along one of the dark, rather narrow streets, he heard a hurrying of feet behind him. Glancing round, he saw the torch-bearer coming along at a trot, holding his flaming torch up in front of him, as he trotted down the middle of the narrow, dark street. Aaron shrank under the wall. The trotting torch-bearer drew near, and now Aaron perceived the other 2 men slowly trotting behind, stealthily, bearing a stretcher on which a body was wrapped up, completely and darkly covered. The torch-bearer passed. The men with the stretcher passed too, hastily and stealthily, the flickering flames revealing them. They took no notice of Aaron, no notice of anything, but trotted softly on towards the center of the city. Their queer, quick footsteps echoed down the distance. Then Aaron, too, resumed his way. He came to the large, brilliantly lighted café. It was Sunday evening, and the place was full. Men, Florentines, many men sat in groups and in 2s and 3s at the little marble tables. They were mostly in dark clothes or black overcoats. They had mostly been drinking just a cup of coffee. Others, however, had glasses of wine or liquor, but mostly it was just a little coffee tray with a tiny coffee pot and a cup and saucer. There was a faint film of tobacco smoke, and the men were all talking. talking, with that peculiar intensity of the Florentines. Aaron felt the intense, compressed sound of many half-secret voices. For the little groups and couples abated their voices, none wished that others should hear what they said. Aaron was looking for a seat. There was no table to him, when suddenly someone took him by the arm. It was Argyle. "Come along now. Come and join us. Here, this way. Come along." Aaron let himself be led away towards a corner. There sat Lily and a strange man, called Levison. The room was warm. Aaron could never bear to be too hot. After sitting a minute, he rose and took off his coat and hung it on a stand near the window. As he did so, he felt the weight of his flute. It was still in his pocket, and he wondered if it was safe to leave it. "I suppose no one will steal from the overcoat pockets," he said as he sat down. "My dear chap, they'd steal the gold filling out of your teeth if you happened to yawn," said Argyle. "Why have you left the valuables in your overcoat?" "My flute," said Aaron. "Oh, they won't steal that," said Argyle. "Besides," said Lily, "we should see anyone who touched it." And so they settled down to the vermouth. "Well," said Argyle, "what have you been doing with yourself, eh? I haven't seen a glimpse of you for a week. Been going to the dogs, eh?" "Or the bitches," said Aaron. "Oh, but look here, that's bad. That's bad. I can see I shall have to take you in hand and commence my work of reform. Oh, I'm a great reformer, and Savonarola in one. I couldn't count the number of people I've led into the right way. It takes some finding, you know. Straight as the gate, damned straight sometimes, a damned tight squeeze." Argyle was somewhat intoxicated. He spoke with a slight stir and laughed, really tickled at his own jokes. The man Levison smiled acquiescent, but Lily was not listening. His brow was heavy, and he seemed abstracted. He hardly noticed Aaron's arrival. "Did you see the row yesterday?" asked Levison. "No," said Aaron. "What was it?" "It was the Socialists. They were making a demonstration against the imprisonment of one of the railway strikers. I was there. They went on all right with a good bit of howling and jibing. A lot of young louts, you know. And the shopkeepers shut up shop, and nobody showed the Italian flag, of course. Well, when they came to the Via Benedetto Croce, there were a few mounted carabinieri, so they stopped the procession. And the sergeant said that the crowd could continue, could go on where they liked, but would they not go down the Via Verrocchio, because it was being repaired. The roadway was all up, and there were piles of cobblestones. These might prove a temptation and lead to trouble. So would the demonstrators not take that road? They might take any other they liked. Well, the very moment he had finished, there was a revolver shot. He made a noise and fell forward over his horse's nose. One of the anarchists had shot him. Then there was hell let loose. The carabinieri fired back, and people were bolting and fighting like devils. I cleared out myself. But, my God, what do you think of it?" "Seems pretty mean," said Aaron. "Mean! He had just spoken them fair. They could go where they liked. Only would they not go down the one road, because of the heap of stones. And they let him finish, and then shot him dead." "Was he dead?" said Aaron. "Yes. Killed outright, the Nazione says." There was a silence. The drinkers in the café all continued to talk vehemently, casting uneasy glances. "Well," said Argyle, "if you let loose the dogs of war, you mustn't expect them to come to heel again in 5 minutes." "But there's no fair play about it, not a bit," said Levison. "Ah, my dear fellow, are you still so young and callow that you cherish the illusion of fair play?" said Argyle. "Yes, I am," said Levison. "Live longer and grow wiser," said Argyle, rather contemptuously. "Are you a socialist?" asked Levison. "Am I my Aunt Tabitha's dachshund bitch called Bella?" said Argyle in his musical, indifferent voice. "Yes, Bella's her name. And if you can tell me a damneder name for a dog, I shall listen, I assure you." "Attentively." "But you haven't got an aunt called Tabitha," said Aaron. "Haven't I? Oh, haven't I? I've got 2 aunts called Tabitha, if not more." "They aren't of any vital importance to you, are they?" said Levison. "Not the very least in the world, if it hadn't been my elder Aunt Tabitha had christened her dachshund bitch Bella. I cut myself off from the family after that. Oh, I turned over a new leaf, with not a family name on it. Couldn't stand Bella amongst the rest." "You must have strained most of the gnats out of your drink, Argyle," said Lily, laughing. "Assiduously, assiduously. I can't stand these little vermin. Oh, I am quite indifferent about swallowing a camel or 2, or even a whole string of dromedaries. How charmingly Eastern that sounds. But gnats! Not for anything in the world would I swallow one." "You're a bit of a socialist, though, aren't you?" persisted Levison, now turning to Lily. "No," said Lily, "I was." "And am no more," said Argyle sarcastically. "My dear fellow, the only hope of salvation for the world lies in the reinstitution of slavery." "What kind of slavery?" asked Levison. "Slavery. Slavery. When I say slavery, I don't mean any of your damned modern reform cant. I mean solid, sound slavery on which the Greek and the Roman world rested. Far finer worlds than ours, my dear chap. Oh, far finer. And can't be done without slavery. Simply can't be done. Oh, they'll all come to realize it when they've had a bit more of this democratic washerwoman business." Levison was laughing, with a slight sneer down his nose. "Anyhow, there's no immediate danger, or hope, if you prefer it, of the reinstituting of classic slavery," he said. "Unfortunately, no. We are all such fools," said Argyle. "Besides," said Levison, "who would you make slaves of?" "Everybody, my dear chap, beginning with the idealists and the theorizing Jews, and after them your nicely bred gentlemen, and then perhaps your profiteers and Rothschilds, and all politicians, and ending up with the proletariat," said Argyle. "Then who would be the masters? The professional classes, doctors and lawyers and so on?" "What? Masters? They would be the sewerage slaves, as being those who had made most smells." There was a moment's silence. "The only fault I have to find with your system," said Levison, rather acidly, "is that there would be only one master, and everybody else slaves." "Do you call that a fault? What do you want with more than one master? Are you asking for several? Well, perhaps there's cunning in that. Cunning devils, these theorizing slaves." And Argyle pushed his face with a devilish leer into Aaron's face. "Cunning devils," he reiterated with a slight tipsy slur. "That befouled Epictetus wasn't the last of 'em, nor the first. Oh, not by any means, not by any means." Here Lily could not avoid a slight spasm of amusement. "But returning to serious conversation," said Levison, turning his rather sallow face to Lily, "I think you'll agree with me that socialism is the inevitable next step." Lily waited for some time without answering. Then he said, with unwilling attention to the question, "I suppose it's the logically inevitable next step." "Use logic as lavatory paper," cried Argyle harshly. "Yes, logically inevitable, and humanly inevitable at the same time. Some form of socialism is bound to come, no matter how you postpone it or try variations," said Levison. "All right, let it come," said Lily. "It's not my affair neither to help it nor to Chapter 20, Part B, of Aaron's Rod, by D.H. Lawrence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20, The Broken Rod, Part B. "There I don't follow you," said Levison. "Suppose you were in Russia now." "I watch it I'm not." "But you're in Italy, which isn't far off. Supposing a socialist revolution takes place all around you. Won't that force the problem on you?" "It is every man's problem," persisted Levison. "Not mine," said Lilly. "How shall you escape it?" said Levison. "Because to me it is no problem. To bolsh or not to bolsh, as far as my mind goes, presents no problem. Not any more than to be or not to be. To be or not to be is simply no problem." "No, I quite agree that since you are already existing, and since death is ultimately inevitable, to be or not to be is no sound problem," said Levison. "But the parallel isn't true of socialism. That is not a problem of existence, but of a certain mode of existence which centuries of thought and action on the part of Europe have now made logically inevitable for Europe. And therefore there is a problem. There is more than a problem. There is a dilemma. Either we must go to the logical conclusion, or—" "Somewhere else," said Lilly. Yes, precisely. But where else?" "That's the one half of the problem. Supposing you do not agree to a logical progression in human social activity, because after all human society through the course of ages only enacts, spasmodically, but still inevitably, the logical development of a given idea. Well, then, I tell you, the idea and the ideal has for me gone dead. Dead as carrion." "Which idea? Which ideal precisely?" "The ideal of love, the ideal that it is better to give than to receive, the ideal of liberty, the ideal of the brotherhood of man, the ideal of the sanctity of human life, the ideal of what we call goodness, charity, benevolence, public-spiritedness, the ideal of sacrifice for a cause, the ideal of unity and unanimity. All the lot, all the whole beehive of ideals, has all got the modern bee disease, and gone putrid, stinking. And when the ideal is dead and putrid, the logical sequence is only stink, which for me is the truth concerning the ideal of good, peaceful, loving humanity, and its logical sequence in socialism and equality, equal opportunity, or whatever you like. But this time he stinketh, and I'm sorry for any Christus who brings him to life again, to stink livingly for another 30 years. The beastly Lazarus of our idealism." "That may be true for you, but it's true for nobody else," said Lilly. "All the worse for them. Let them die of the bee disease." "Not only that," persisted Levison, "but what is your alternative? Is it merely nihilism?" "My alternative," said Lilly, "is an alternative for no one but myself, so I'll keep my mouth shut about it." "That isn't fair." "I tell you the ideal of fairness stinks with the rest. I have no obligation to say what I think." "Yes, if you enter into conversation, you have—" "Bah! Then I didn't enter into conversation. The only thing is, I agree in the rough with Argyle. You've got to have a sort of slavery again. People are not men. They are insects and instruments, and their destiny is slavery. They are too many for me. And so what I think is ineffectual. But ultimately they will be brought to agree, after sufficient extermination. And then they will elect for themselves a proper and healthy and energetic slavery." "I should like to know what you mean by slavery, because to me it is impossible that slavery should be healthy and energetic. You seem to have some other idea in your mind, and you merely use the word slavery out of exasperation. I mean it none the less. I mean a real committal of the life issue of inferior beings to the responsibility of a superior being." "It'll take a bit of knowing who are the inferior and which is the superior," said Levison sarcastically. "Not a bit. It is written between a man's brows which he is." "I'm afraid we shall all read differently, so long as we're liars. And putting that question aside, I presume that you mean that this committal of the life issue of inferior beings to someone higher shall be made voluntarily, a sort of voluntary self-gift of the inferiors." "Yes, more or less, and a voluntary acceptance. For it's no pretty gift after all. But once made, it must be held fast by genuine power. Oh, yes. No playing and fooling about with it. permanent and very efficacious power." "You mean military power?" "I do, of course." Here Levison smiled a long, slow, subtle smile of ridicule. It all seemed to him the preposterous pretentiousness of a megalomaniac, one whom, after a while, humanity would probably have the satisfaction of putting into prison or into a lunatic asylum. And Levison felt strong, overwhelmingly strong, in the huge social power with which he, insignificant as he was armed against such criminal, imbecile pretensions as those above set forth. Prison or the lunatic asylum. The face of the fellow gloated in these two inevitable engines of his disapproval. "It will take you some time before you'll get your doctrines accepted," he said. "Accepted? I'd be sorry. I don't want a lot of swine snouting and sniffing at me with their acceptance. Bah, Levison, one can easily make a fool of you. Do you take this as my gospel?" "I take it you are speaking seriously." Here Lilly broke into that peculiar, gay, whimsical smile. "But I should say the blank opposite with just as much fervor," he declared. "Do you mean to say you don't mean what you've been saying?" said Levison, now really looking angry. "Why, I'll tell you the real truth," said Lilly. "I think every man is a sacred and holy individual, never to be violated. I think there is only one thing I hate to the verge of madness, and that is bullying. To see any living creature bullied, in any way, almost makes a murderer of me. That is true. Do you believe it?" "Yes," said Levison unwillingly. "That may be true as well. You have no doubt, like most of us, got a complex nature which—" Crash! There intervened one awful minute of pure shock, when the soul was in darkness. Out of this shock Aaron felt himself issuing amid a mass of terrible sensations. The fearful blow of the explosion, the noise of glass, the hoarse howl of people, the rushing of men, the sudden gulf, the awful gulfing whirlpool of horror in the social life. He stood in agony and semi-blindness amid a chaos. Then, as he began to recover his consciousness, he found himself standing by a pillar some distance from where he had been sitting. He saw a place where tables and chairs were all upside down, legs in the air, amid debris of glass and breakage. He saw the cafe almost empty, nearly everybody gone. He saw the owner, or the manager, advancing aghast to the place of debris. He saw Lilly standing not far off, white as a sheet, and as if unconscious. And still he had no idea of what had happened. He thought perhaps something had broken down. He could not understand. Lilly began to look round. He caught Aaron's eye, and then Aaron began to approach his friend. "What is it?" he asked. "A bomb," said Lilly. The manager, and one old waiter, and 3 or 4 youths had now advanced to the place of debris. And now Aaron saw that a man was lying there, and horror, blood was running across the floor of the cafe. Men began now hastily to return to the place. Some seized their hats and departed again at once. But many began to crowd in, a black, eager crowd of men pressing to where the bomb had burst, where the man was lying. It was rather dark. Some of the lamps were broken, but enough still shone. Men surged in with that eager, excited zest of people when there has been an accident. Grey carabinieri and carabinieri in the cocked hat and fine Sunday uniform pressed forward officiously. "Let us go," said Lilly. And he went to the far corner where his hat hung, but Aaron looked in vain for his own hat. The bomb had fallen near the stand where he had hung it and his overcoat. "My hat and coat," he said to Lilly. Lilly, not very tall, stood on tiptoe. Then he climbed on a chair and looked round. Then he squeezed past the crowd. Aaron followed. On the other side of the crowd, excited, angry men were wrestling over overcoats that were mixed up with a broken marble tabletop. Aaron spied his own black hat under the sofa near the wall. He waited his turn, and then in the confusion pressed forward to where the coats were. Someone had dragged out his, and it lay on the floor under many feet. He managed, with a struggle, to get it from under the feet of the crowd. He felt at once for his flute, but his trampled, torn coat had no flute in its pocket. He pushed and struggled, caught sight of a section, and picked it up. But it was split right down. 2 silver stops were torn out, and a long thin spelch of wood was curiously torn off. He looked at it, and his heart stood still. No need to look for the rest. He felt utterly, utterly overcome, as if he didn't care what became of him any further. He didn't care whether he were hit by a bomb or whether he himself threw the next bomb and hit somebody. He just didn't care any more about anything in life or death. It was as if the reins of his life slipped from his hands, and he would let everything run where it would, so long as it did run. Then he became aware of Lily's eyes on him, and automatically he joined the little man. "Let us go," said Lily. And they pushed their way through the door. The police were just marching across the square. Aaron and Lily walked in the opposite direction. Groups of people were watching. Suddenly Lily swerved. In the middle of the road was a large black glisten of blood, trickling horribly. A wounded man had run from the blow and fallen here. Aaron did not know where he was going, but in the Via Tornabuoni, Lily turned towards the Arno, and soon they were on the Ponte Santa Trinita. "Who threw the bomb?" said Aaron. "I suppose an anarchist." "It's all the same," said Aaron. The 2 men, as if unable to walk any further, leaned on the broad parapet of the bridge and looked at the water in the darkness of the still deserted night. Aaron still had his flute section in his hand, his overcoat over his arm. "Is that your flute?" asked Lily. "Bit of it. Smashed." "Let me look." He looked and gave it back. "No good," he said. "Oh, no," said Aaron. "Throw it in the river, Aaron," said Lily. Aaron turned and looked at him. "Throw it in the river," repeated Lily. "It's an end." Aaron nervelessly dropped the flute into the stream. The 2 men stood leaning on the bridge parapet, as if unable to move. "We shall have to go home," said Lily. "Tammy may hear of it and be anxious." Aaron was quite dumbfounded by the night's event, the loss of his flute. Here was a blow he had not expected, and the loss was for him symbolistic. It chimed with something in his soul, the bomb, the smashed flute, the end. "There goes Aaron's rod, then," he said to Lily. "It'll grow again. It's a reed, a water plant. You can't kill it," said Lily, unheeding. "And me? You'll have
Chapter 21, Part A of Aaron's Rod by D.H. Lawrence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by K. Hand. Chapter 21, Words, Part A. He went home to bed, and dreamed a strange dream. He dreamed that he was in a country with which he was not acquainted. Night was coming on, and he had nowhere to sleep. So he passed to the mouth of a sort of cave or house, in which a woman, an old woman, sat. Therefore he entered, and though he could not understand the language, still his second self understood. The cave was a house, and men came home from work. His second self assumed that they were tin miners. He wandered uneasily to and fro, no one taking any particular notice of him. And he realized that there was a whole vast country spreading, a sort of underworld country, spreading away beyond him. He wandered from vast apartment to apartment, down narrow corridors like the roads in a mine. In one of the great square rooms the men were going to eat. And it seemed to him that what they were going to eat was a man, a naked man. But his second self knew that what appeared to his eyes as a man was really a man's skin stuffed tight with prepared meat, as the skin of a bologna sausage. This did not prevent his seeing the naked man who was to be eaten walk slowly and stiffly across the gangway and down the corridor. He saw him from behind. It was a big, handsome man in the prime of life, quite naked and perhaps stupid. But of course he was only a skin stuffed with meat, whom the grey tin miners were going to eat. Aaron, the dream Aaron, turned another way and strayed along the vast square rooms, cavern apartments. He came into one room where there were many children all in white gowns, and they were all busily putting themselves to bed, in the many beds scattered about the room at haphazard. And each child went to bed with a wreath of flowers on its head, white flowers and pink, so it seemed. So there they all lay, in their flower crowns, in the vast space of the rooms. And Aaron went away. He could not remember the following part, only he seemed to have passed through many grey domestic apartments, where were all women, all greyish in their clothes and appearance, being wives of the underground tin miners. The men were away, and the dream Aaron remembered with fear the food they were to eat. The next thing he could recall was that he was in a boat, and now he was most definitely two people. His invisible, conscious self, what we have called his second self, hovered as it were before the prow of the boat, seeing and knowing, but unseen. His other self, the palpable Aaron, sat as a passenger in the boat, which was being rowed by the unknown people of this underworld. They stood up as they thrust the boat along. Other passengers were in the boat too, women as well, but all of them unknown people, and not noticeable. The boat was upon a great lake in the underworld country, a lake of dark blue water, but crystal clear and very beautiful in color. The second or invisible Aaron sat in the prow and watched the fishes swimming suspended in the clear, beautiful, dark blue water. Some were pale fish, some frightening looking, like centipedes swimming, and some were dark fish of definite form and delightful to watch. The palpable or visible Aaron sat at the side of the boat, on the end of the middle seat, with his naked right elbow leaning out over the side. And now the boat entered upon shallows. The impalpable Aaron in the bows saw the whitish clay of the bottom swirl up in clouds at each thrust of the oars, whitish clayey clouds which would envelop the strange fishes in a sudden mist. And on the right hand of the course stakes stood up in the water at intervals to mark the course. The boat must pass very near these stakes, almost touching, and Aaron's naked elbow was leaning right over the side. As they approached the first stake, the boatmen all uttered a strange cry of warning in a foreign language. The flesh and blood Aaron seemed not even to hear. The invisible Aaron heard, but did not comprehend the words of the cry. So the naked elbow struck smartly against the stake as the boat passed. The rowers rowed on. And still the flesh and blood Aaron sat with his arm over the side. Another stake was nearing. Will he heed? Will he heed? Thought this anxious second self. The rowers gave the strange warning cry. He did not heed, and again the elbow struck against the stake as the boat passed. And yet the flesh and blood Aaron sat on and made no sign. There were stakes all along this shallow part of the lake. Beyond was deep water again. The invisible Aaron was becoming anxious. Will he never hear? Will he never heed? Will he never understand? He thought. And he watched in pain for the next stake. But still the flesh and blood Aaron sat on, and though the rowers cried so acutely that the invisible Aaron almost understood their very language, still the Aaron seated at the side heard nothing, and his elbow struck against the third stake. This was almost too much. But after a few moments, as the boat rowed on, the palpable Aaron changed his position as he sat, and drew in his arm, though even now he was not aware of any need to do so. The invisible Aaron breathed with relief in the bows. The boat swung steadily on, into the deep, unfathomable water again. They were drawing near a city, a lake city like Mexico. They must have reached a city, because when Aaron woke up and tried to piece together the dream of which these are mere fragments, he could remember having just seen an idol. An Astarte he knew it as, seated by the road, and in her open lap were some eggs, smallish hen's eggs, 1 or 2 bigger eggs like a swan's, and one single little roll of bread. These lay in the lap of the roadside Astarte, and then he could remember no more. He woke and for a minute tried to remember what he had been dreaming and what it all meant. But he quickly relinquished the effort. So he looked at his watch. It was only 3:30. He had one of those American watches with luminous phosphorescent figures and fingers, and tonight he felt afraid of its eerily shining face. He was awake a long time in the dark, for 2 hours, thinking and not thinking, in that barren state which is not sleep nor yet full wakefulness, and which is a painful strain. At length he went to sleep again, and did not wake till past 8 o'clock. He did not ring for his coffee till 9. Outside was a bright day, but he hardly heeded it. He lay profitlessly, thinking. With the breaking of the flute, that which was slowly breaking had finally shattered at last. But there was nothing ahead, no plan, no prospect. He knew quite well that people would help him, Francis Decker, or Angus Guest, or the Marchese, or Lilly. They would get him a new flute, and find him engagements. But what was the good? His flute was broken, and broken finally. The bomb had settled it. The bomb had settled it and everything. It was an end, no matter how he tried to patch things up. The only thing he felt was a thread of destiny attaching him to Lilly. The rest had all gone as bare and bald as the dead orb of the moon. So he made up his mind, if he could, to make some plans that would bring his life together with that of his evanescent friend. Lilly was a peculiar bird. Clever and attractive as he undoubtedly was, he was perhaps the most objectionable person to know. It was stamped on his peculiar face. Aaron thought of Lilly's dark, ugly face, which had something that lurked in it as a creature under leaves. Then he thought of the wide-apart eyes, with their curious candor and surety, the peculiar half-veiled surety, as if nothing could overcome him. It made people angry, this look of silent, indifferent assurance. Nothing can touch him on the quick, nothing can really get at him, they felt at last. And they felt it with resentment, almost with hate. They wanted to be able to get at him. For he was so open-seeming, so very outspoken. He gave himself away so much, and he had no money to fall back on. Yet he gave himself away so easily, paid such attention, almost deference, to any chance friend. So they all thought, here is a wise person who finds me the wonder which I really am. And lo and behold, after he had given them the trial, and found their inevitable limitations, he departed and ceased to heed their wonderful existence. Which, to say the least of it, was fraudulent and damnable. It was then, after his departure, that they realized his basic indifference to them, and his silent arrogance. A silent arrogance that knew all their wisdom, and left them to it. Aaron had been through it all. He had started by thinking Lilly a peculiar little freak, gone on to think him a wonderful chap, and a bit pathetic, progressed, and found him generous, but overbearing. Then cruel and intolerant, allowing no man to have a soul of his own. Then terribly arrogant, throwing a fellow aside like an old glove which is in holes at the finger ends. And all the time, which was most beastly, seeing through one. All the time, freak and outsider as he was, Lilly knew. He knew, and his soul was against the whole world. Driven to bay and forced to choose. Forced to choose, not between life and death, but between the world and the uncertain, assertive Lilly. Forced to choose, and yet, in the world, having nothing left to choose. For in the world there was nothing left to choose, unless he would give in and try for success. Aaron knew well enough that if he liked to do a bit of buttering, people would gladly make a success of him and give him money and success. He could become quite a favorite. But no, if he had to give in to something, if he really had to give in, and it seemed he had, then he would rather give in to the little Lilly than to the beastly people of the world. If he had to give in, then it should be to no woman, and to no social ideal, and to no social institution. No. If he had to yield his willful independence and give himself, then he would rather give himself to the little individual man than to any of the rest. For, to tell the truth, in the man was something incomprehensible which had dominion over him, if he chose to allow it. As he lay pondering this over, escaping from the cul-de-sac in which he had been running for so long, by yielding to one of his pursuers, yielding to the peculiar mastery of one man's nature rather than to the quicksands of woman or the stinking bogs of society, yielding, since yield he must, in some direction or other, yielding in a new direction now to one strange and incalculable little individual. As Aaron lay so relaxing, finding a peculiar delight in giving his soul to his mind's hero, the self-same hero tapped and entered. "I wondered," he said, "if you'd like to walk into the country with me. It is such a nice day. I thought you might have gone out already, but here you are, in bed like a woman who's had a baby. You're all right, aren't you?" "Yes," said Aaron, "I'm all right." "Miserable about your flute? Ah, well, there are more flutes. Get up, then." And Lily went to the window and stood out, looking at the river. "We're going away on Thursday," he said. "Where to?" said Aaron. "Naples. We've got a little house there for the winter, in the country, not far from Sorrento. I must get a bit of work done, now that the winter is coming. And forget all about everything and just live with life. What's the good of running after life when we've got it in us, if nobody prevents us and obstructs us?" Aaron felt very queer. "But for how long will you settle down?" he asked. "Oh, only the winter. I am a vagrant, really, or a migrant. I must migrate. Do you think a cuckoo in Africa and a cuckoo in Essex is one and the same bird? Anyhow, I know I must oscillate between north and south, so oscillate I do. It's just my nature. All people don't have the same needs." "I guess there are others that feel caged as well as you," said Aaron. "I guess they are. And maybe they haven't a chance to get out." Lily was silent a moment. Then he said, "Well, I didn't make life in society. I can only go my own way." Aaron, too, was silent. A deep disappointment was settling over his spirit. "Will you be alone all winter?" "Just myself and Tanny," he answered, "but people always turn up." "And then next year, what will you do?" "Who knows? I may sail far off. I should like to. I should like to try quite a new life mode. This is finished in me, and yet perhaps it is absurd to go further. I'm rather sick of seekers. I hate a seeker." "What?" said Aaron rather sarcastically. "Those who are looking for a new religion?" "Religion, and love, and all that. It's a disease now." "Oh, I don't know," said Aaron. "Perhaps the lack of love and religion is the disease." "Ah, bah! The grinding the old millstones of love and God is what ails us when there's no more grist between the stones. We've ground love very small. Time to forget it. Forget the very words religion and God and love, and then have a shot at a new mode. But the very words rivet us down and don't let us move. Rivets, and we can't get them out." "And where should we be if we could?" said Aaron. "We might begin to be ourselves, anyhow." "And what does that mean?" said Aaron. "Being yourself. What does it mean?" "To me, everything." "And to most folks, nothing. They've got to have a goal." "There is no goal. I loathe goals more than any other impertinence. Jails they are. Bah! Jails and jailers, jails and jailers." "Wherever you go you'll find people with their noses tied to some goal," said Aaron. "Their wagon hitched to a star, which goes round and round like an ass in a gin," laughed Lily. "Be damned to it." Aaron got himself dressed, and the two men went out, took a tram, and went into the country. Aaron could not help it. Lily put his back up. They came to a little inn near a bridge where a broad stream rustled bright and shallow. It was a sunny, warm day, and Aaron and Lily had a table outside under the thin trees at the top of the bank above the river. The yellow leaves were falling. The Tuscan sky was turquoise blue. In the stream below, 3 naked boys still adventurously bathed, and lay flat on the shingle in the sun. A wagon with 2 pale, loving, velvety oxen drew slowly down the hill, looking at each step as if they were going to come to rest, to move no more. But still they stepped forward, till they came to the inn, and there they stood to rest. 2 old women were picking the last acorns under 3 scrubby oak trees, whilst a girl with bare feet drove her 2 goats and a sheep up from the waterside towards the women. The girl wore a dress that had been blue, perhaps indigo, but which had faded to the beautiful lavender-purple color which is so common, and which always reminded Lilly of purple anemones in the south. The 2 friends sat in the sun and drank red wine. It was midday. From the thin, square belfry on the opposite hill the bells had rung. The old woman and the girl squatted under the trees, eating their bread and figs. The boys were dressing, fluttering into their shirts on the stream's shingle. A big girl went past, with somebody's dinner tied in a red kerchief and perched on her head. It was one of the most precious hours, the hour of pause, noon and the sun, and the quiet acceptance of the world. At such a time everything seems to fall into a true relationship after the strain of work and of urge. Aaron looked at Lilly and saw the same odd, distant look on his face as on the face of some animal when it lies awake and alert, yet perfectly at one with its surroundings. It was something quite different from happiness, an alert enjoyment of rest, an intense and satisfying sense of centrality, as a dog when it basks in the sun with one eye open and winking, or a rabbit quite still and wide-eyed with a faintly twitching nose. Not passivity, but alert enjoyment of being central, life central in one's own little circumambient world. They sat thus still, or lay under the trees, for an hour and a half. Then Lilly paid the bill and went on. "What am I going to do this winter, do you think?" Chapter 21, Part B of Aaron's Rod by D.H. Lawrence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by K. Hand. Chapter 21, Words, Part B. Nay, that's what I want to know. Do you want anything? I mean, does something drive you from inside? I can't just rest, said Aaron. Can't you settle down to something? To a job, for instance? I've not found the job I could settle down to yet, said Aaron. Why not? It's just my nature. Are you a seeker? Have you got a divine urge or need? How do I know? Laughed Aaron. Perhaps I've got a damned urge at the bottom of me. I'm sure it's nothing divine. Very well, then. Now, in life, there are only 2 great dynamic urges. Do you believe me? How do I know? Laughed Aaron. Do you want to be believed? No, I don't care a straw. Only for your own sake, you better believe me. All right, then, what about it? Well, then, there are only 2 great dynamic urges in life, love and power. Love and power, said Aaron. I don't see power as so very important. You don't see because you don't look, but that's not the point. What sort of urge is your urge? Is it the love urge? I don't know, said Aaron. Yes, you do. You know that you have got an urge, don't you? Yes. Rather unwillingly, Aaron admitted it. Well, then what is it? Is it that you want to love or to be obeyed? A bit of both. All right, a bit of both. And what are you looking for in love? A woman whom you can love and who will love you, out and all and happy ever after sort of thing? That's what I started out for, perhaps, laughed Aaron. And now you know it's all my eye. Aaron looked at Lilly, unwilling to admit it. Lilly began to laugh. You know it well enough, he said. It's one of your lost illusions, my boy. Well, then, what next? Is it a god you're after? Do you want a God you can strive to and attain through love and live happy ever after, countless millions of eternities, immortality, and all that? Is this your little dodge? Again Aaron looked at Lily with that odd double look of mockery and unwillingness to give himself away. All right, then. You've got a love urge that urges you to God, have you? Then go and join the Buddhists in Burma, or the newest fangled Christians in Europe. Go and stick your head in a bush of nirvana or spiritual perfection. Trot off. I won't, said Aaron. You must. If you've got a love urge, then give it its fulfillment. I haven't got a love urge. You have. You want to get excited in love. You want to be carried away in love. You want to whoosh off in a nice little love whoosh and love yourself. Don't deny it. I know you do. You want passion to sweep you off on wings of fire till you surpass yourself, and like the swooping eagle swoop right into the sun. I know you do, my love boy. Not any more. Not any more. I've been had too often, laughed Aaron. Bah! It's a lesson men never learn. No matter how sick they make themselves with love, they always rush for more, like a dog to his vomit. Well, what am I to do, then, if I'm not to love? Cried Aaron. You want to go on, from passion to passion, from ecstasy to ecstasy, from triumph to triumph, until you can whoosh away into glory, beyond yourself, all bonds loosened and happily ever after. Either that or nirvana, opposite side of the medal. There's probably more hate than love in me, said Aaron. That's the recoil of the same urge. The anarchist, the criminal, the murderer, he is only the extreme lover acting on the recoil. But it is love, only in recoil. It flies back the love urge and becomes a horror. All right, then, I'm a criminal and a murderer, said Aaron. No, you're not. But you've a love urge, and perhaps on the recoil just now. But listen to me. It's no good thinking the love urge is the one and only. Niente. You can whoosh if you like and get excited and carried away loving a woman or humanity or God. Swoop away in the love direction till you lose yourself. But that's where you're had. You can't lose yourself. You can try, but you might just as well try to swallow yourself. You'll only bite your fingers off in the attempt. You can't lose yourself, neither in woman, nor humanity, nor in God. You've always got yourself on your hands in the end, and a very raw and jaded and humiliated and nervous, neurasthenic self it is too in the end. A very nasty thing to wake up to is one's own raw self after an excessive love whoosh. Look even at President Wilson. He love whooshed for humanity, and found in the end he'd only got a very sorry self on his hands. So leave off, my boy, leave off love whooshing. You can't lose yourself, so stop trying. The responsibility is on your own shoulders all the time, and no god which man has ever struck can take it off. You are yourself, and so be yourself. Stick to it and abide by it. Passion or no passion, ecstasy or no ecstasy, urge or no urge, there's no goal outside you where you can consummate like an eagle flying into the sun or a moth into a candle. There's no goal outside you, and there's no God outside you. No God whom you can get to and rest in. None. It's a case of trot, trot to market to buy a penny bun, and trot, trot back again as fast as you can run. But there's no God outside you whom you can rise to or sink to or swoop away to. You can't even gum yourself to a divine nirvana moon, because all the time you've got to eat your dinner and digest it. There is no goal outside you, none. There is only one thing, your own very self, so you better stick to it. You can't be any bigger than just yourself, so you needn't drag God in. You've got one job and no more. There inside you lies your own very self, like a germinating egg, your precious Easter egg of your own soul. There it is, developing bit by bit from one single egg cell which you were at your conception in your mother's womb, and on to the strange and peculiar complication in unity which never stops till you die. If then. You've got an innermost, integral, unique self, and since it's the only thing you have got or ever will have, don't go trying to lose it. You've got to develop it, from the egg into the chicken, and from the chicken into the one and only phoenix, of which there can only be one at a time in the universe. There can be only one of you at a time in the universe, and one of me. So don't forget it. Your own single oneness is your destiny. Your destiny comes from within, from your own self-form. And you can't know it beforehand, neither your destiny nor your self-form. You can only develop it. You can only stick to your own very self and never betray it. And by so sticking, you can develop the one and only phoenix out of your own self, and you unfold your own destiny as a dandelion unfolds itself into a dandelion and not into a stick of celery. Remember this, my boy. You've never got to deny the Holy Ghost which is inside you, your own soul's self. Never. Or you'll catch it. And you've never got to think you'll dodge the responsibility of your own soul's self by loving or sacrificing or nirvana-ing, or even anarchizing and throwing bombs. You never will. Aaron was silenced for a moment by this flood of words. Then he said, smiling, "So, I'd better sit tight on my soul till it hatches, had I?" "Oh, yes. If your soul's urges you to love, then love. But always know that what you are doing is the fulfilling of your own soul's impulse. It's no good trying to act by prescription, not a bit, and it's no use getting into frenzies. If you've got to go in for love and passion, go in for them. But they aren't the goal. They're a mere means, a life means, if you will. The only goal is the fulfilling of your own soul's active desire and suggestion. Be passionate as much as ever it is your nature to be passionate, and deeply sensual as far as you can be. Small souls have a small sensuality, deep souls a deep one. But remember, all the time, the responsibility is upon your own head, it all rests with your own lonely soul, the responsibility for your own action." "I never said it didn't," said Aaron. "You never said it did. You never accepted. You thought there was something outside to justify you, God, or a creed, or a prescription. But remember, your soul inside you is your only Godhead. It develops your actions within you as a tree develops its own new cells, and the cells push on into buds and boughs and flowers. And these are your passion, and your acts, and your thoughts and expressions, your developing consciousness. You don't know beforehand, and you can't. You can only stick to your own soul through thick and thin. You are your own tree of life, roots and limbs and trunk. Somewhere within the wholeness of the tree lies the very self, the quick, its own innate Holy Ghost. And this Holy Ghost puts forth new buds, and pushes past old limits, and shakes off a whole body of dying leaves. And the old limits hate being impassed, and the old leaves hate to fall, but they must if the tree soul says so." They had sat down again during this harangue under a white wall. Aaron listened more to the voice than the words. It was more the sound value which entered his soul, the tone, the strange speech music which sank into him. The sense he hardly heeded. And yet he understood. He knew. He understood, oh, so much more deeply than if he had listened with his head. And he answered an objection from the bottom of his soul. "But you talk," he said, "as if we were like trees, alone by ourselves in the world. We aren't. If we love, it needs another person than ourselves, and if we hate, and even if we talk." "Quite," said Lily, "and that's just the point. We've got to love and hate moreover, and even talk. But we haven't got to fix on any one of these modes and say that's the only mode. It is such imbecility to say that love and love alone must rule. It is so obviously not the case. Yet we try and make it so." "I feel that," said Aaron. "It's all a lie." "It's worse. It's a half lie. But listen, I told you there were two urges, two great life urges, didn't I? There may be more, but it comes on me so strongly now that there are two, love and power, And we've been trying to work ourselves, at least as individuals, from the love urge exclusively, hating the power urge and repressing it. And now I find we've got to accept the very thing we've hated. We've exhausted our love urge for the moment, and yet we try to force it to continue working. So we get inevitability, anarchy, and murder. It's no good. We've got to accept the power motive, accept it in deep responsibility. Do you understand me? It is a great life motive. It was that great dark power urge which kept Egypt so intensely living for so many centuries. It is a vast dark source of life and strength in us now, wanting either to issue into true action or to burst into cataclysm. Power. The power urge. The will to power. But not in Nietzsche's sense. Not intellectual power, not mental power, not conscious will power, not even wisdom, but dark, living, fructifying power. Do you know what I mean? I don't know, said Aaron. Take what you call love, for example. In the real way of love, the positive aim is to make the other person or persons happy. It devotes itself to the other or to others. But change the mode. Let the urge be the urge of power. Then the great desire is not happiness, neither of the beloved nor of oneself. Happiness is only one of many states, and it is horrible to think of fixing us down to one state. The urge of power does not seek for happiness any more than for any other state. It urges from within, darkly, for the displacing of the old leaves, the inception of the new. It is powerful and self-central, not seeking its center outside, in some god or some beloved, but acting indomitably from within itself. And of course there must be one who urges and one who is impelled. Just as in love there is a beloved and a lover. The man is supposed to be the lover, the woman the beloved. Now, in the urge of power, it is the reverse. The woman must submit, but deeply, deeply submit. Not to any foolish fixed authority, not to any foolish and arbitrary will, but to something deep, deeper. To the soul in its dark motion of power and pride. We must reverse the poles. The woman must now submit, but deeply, deeply and richly. No subservience, none of that. No slavery. A deep, unfathomable, free submission. You'll never get it, said Aaron. You will, if you abandon the love idea and the love motive, and if you stand apart and never bully, never force from the conscious will. That's where Nietzsche was wrong. His was the conscious and benevolent will, in fact, the love will. But the deep power urge is not conscious of its aims, and it is certainly not consciously benevolent or love-directed. Whatever else happens, somewhere, sometime, the deep power urge in man will have to issue forth again, and women will submit, livingly, not subjectedly. She never will, persisted Aaron. Anything else will happen, but not that. She will, said Lily, once man disengages himself from the love mode and stands clear. Once he stands clear and the other great urge begins to flow in him, then the woman won't be able to resist. Her own soul will wish to yield itself. Woman yield? Aaron re-echoed. Woman, and man too. Yield to the deep power soul in the individual man and obey implicitly. I don't go back on what I said before. I do believe that every man must fulfill his own soul. Every woman must be herself, herself only, not some man's instrument or some embodied theory. But the mode of our being is such that we can only live and have our being whilst we are implicit in one of the great dynamic modes. We must either love or rule. And once the love mode changes, as change it must, for we are worn out and becoming evil in its persistence, then the other mode will take place in us, and there will be a profound, profound obedience in place of this love-crying obedience to the incalculable power urge. And men must submit to the greater soul in a man for their guidance, and women must submit to the positive power soul in man for their being. You'll never get it, said Aaron. You will when all men want it. All men say they want a leader. Then let them in their souls submit to some greater soul than theirs. At present, when they say they want a leader, they mean they want an instrument, like Lloyd George. A mere instrument for their use. But it's more than that. It's the reverse. It's the deep, fathomless submission to the heroic soul in a greater man. You, Aaron, you too have the need to submit. You, too, have the need livingly to yield to a more heroic soul, to give yourself. You know you have, and you know it isn't love. It is life submission. And you know it, but you kick against the pricks. And perhaps you'd rather die than yield, and so die you must. It is your affair. There was a long pause. Then Aaron looked up into Lily's face. It was dark and remote seeing. It was like a Byzantine icon at the moment. "And whom shall I submit to?" he said. "Your soul will tell you," replied the other. The end.